Imagine, if you will, living in a house where every single word has relatives.
Oh, that's a great way to picture it.
Right. And I don't mean those distant, twice-removed relatives you only see at awkward family reunions once a decade. I mean an immediate, deeply connected, vibrant family living under one massive roof.
Hmm.
I want you, the listener, to really picture this house for a second. You wake up, and the language you use in your kitchen, making coffee and talking to your family, it is a very specific temperature.
Yeah, it's very distinct.
It's intimate, it's warm, it's full of shortcuts and like inside jokes and comfortable slang. But then you step out of your front door and you walk into the public square, or maybe you step up to a podium to deliver a speech.
A completely different environment.
Exactly. And suddenly, the language you are expected to use changes completely. It puts on these heavy, beautiful, centuries-old ceremonial robes.
That is such a striking image.
You're constantly moving between the rooms of this house, changing your linguistic clothes depending on exactly who you are talking to, what room you're standing in, and, well, what level of history you want to invoke.
It is a stunning image, and frankly, it is the only way to effectively visualize the absolute vastness of the system we are exploring today.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about language, it is so tempting to just view it as a utilitarian tool.
Yeah.
A mechanism for getting a thought out of my brain and into yours.
Like a hammer or a wrench.
Right. But a language with this kind of architecture isn't just a tool, it is an entire habitat. It's an environment that you inhabit, and that environment shapes how you move through the world.
Which brings us to our mission for you, our listener,
Yeah.
today. We are taking you into one of the most structurally fascinating, historically dense linguistic habitats on the planet.
Absolutely.
We have been poring over a massive stack of source materials for this deep dive. We've got historical research, linguistic breakdowns, cultural psychology notes, and it is all centered on the Arabic language.
And there is so much to cover.
So much. But here is our promise to you right off the bat. We are not going to just hand you a textbook list of grammar rules.
No pop quizzes.
Right. We're not running through verb conjugations like high school. We want to bypass the mechanics and get straight to the cultural psychology of Arabic. We're looking at the foundational questions from these sources. How does thinking inside this specific linguistic architecture actually shape a person's worldview? How does it, alter their sense of time, their social relationships, and their understanding of history?
Which is such a vital approach, because if we try to analyze Arabic strictly as a functional communicative tool, as you said, like a wrench, we miss the entire substance of what makes it endure.
Yeah, the sources are very clear on that.
They are. Arabic is what linguists and historians call a civilizational language. It is a language that carries profound religious, philosophical, and intellectual weight.
It's heavy.
It's incredibly heavy. It is not a static object sitting in a museum display case. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that has absorbed and shaped ancient empires, driven global scientific revolutions, carried sacred theology, and dictated the intimate daily lives of hundreds of millions of people across centuries. It operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and it demands to be understood on its own terms.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to even begin to understand a house of that scale, a habitat that vast, we have to look at the foundation.
The bricks.
Right, we have to look at how the individual bricks are actually made and how they relate to the earth they sit on. And from what I'm seeing in the notes, the fundamental structural logic of Arabic is completely alien to the way you and I, speaking English right now, process vocabulary.
Completely different.
The core concept here is root and pattern morphology.
Yeah.
So break this down for us. If I'm building a word in Arabic, what am I actually doing?
Well, let's contrast it with English first, just to highlight the difference.
Okay.
English is fundamentally a language of accumulation. It's a scavenger language.
A scavenger language. I like that.
Right, because we borrow a word from French over here, we take a word from Latin over there, we grab a chunk of old Germanic roots and we pile them all together.
Just a big pile.
Exactly. When we look at our vocabulary, it looks like a pile of entirely unrelated bricks. Arabic, however, doesn't scavenge to build its core vocabulary. It generates it internally through this system of root and pattern morphology.
Okay.
In the classic model of Arabic, almost every word is built from a consonantal root.
A consonantal root. Meaning just the consonants? No vowels?
Correct. No vowels at all in the root itself. This root is usually made up of 3 consonants. Those 3 letters provide what linguists call the lexical core.
The core idea.
Yeah, you can think of it as the soul of the idea, the broad semantic field of meaning. But a root on its own is just a concept. It's not a functioning word yet.
You can't just say the root.
No, to make it a word you can actually speak and use in a sentence, you have to apply a vowel pattern to it. You pour that three-letter root into a specific morphological template.
Like pouring concrete into a mold.
Exactly like that. You might add short vowels between the consonants or a long vowel, or sometimes an extra consonant prefix at the beginning. That pattern provides the grammatical meaning.
Okay, I'm with you.
So it tells you if the word is a noun, a verb, an adjective, the person doing the action, or the place where the action happens.
So the root is the raw material, the conceptual soul, and the pattern is the specific physical body it takes on in a sentence.
Beautifully put.
Let's look at the classic example the source material provides to really ground this for the listener. The root KTB.
Yes, the letters K, T, and B. This specific three-letter root broadly relates to the abstract concept of writing or marking or recording.
Okay.
Now watch what happens when we take KTB and pour it into different vowel patterns. If you want to create the basic verb he wrote, you apply a pattern of short A vowels, you get kataba.
K-A-T-A-B-A. Okay, I see the frame. The K, the T, and the B are the anchors.
Right. Now let's change the pattern. If you want the word for book, you say kitabak.
Still hearing the K, the T, and the B.
If you want to say writer or author, you know the person doing the action, you use an active participle pattern and you get katib.
Wow.
If you want to talk about the physical place where the writing happens, like a library or a bookstore, you add an M prefix to the root, creating maktaba.
Maktaba.
And if you want the word for office or desk, it's maktab. If you want to say something is written, like a letter or a matter of destiny, it is maktab.
It is an incredible mathematical elegance.
It really is.
It feels like geometry. And for you listening, I want you to really compare this to how we just experienced those exact same concepts in English. Think about the words we just used to translate those Arabic terms. Write, book, author, library, desk.
They share nothing.
Exactly. Phonetically, structurally, historically, those English words have absolutely nothing to do with each other. The notes point out that book comes from a Germanic root for beechwood, because early runes were carved on wood. Library comes from the Latin liber, meaning the inner bark of a tree. Author comes from Old French. Desk comes from medieval Latin. In English, we just have to memorize these separate disconnected bricks and throw them into a sentence together.
Yes.
But what the sources are describing in Arabic isn't a pile of bricks. It's an interconnected root system. It's a forest.
A forest is the perfect analogy, and the psychological implications of this are profound. According to the research in our notes on the Arabic mental lexicon, this root and pattern structure isn't just a historical curiosity for etymologists to study.
It's not just trivia.
Not at all. It is highly psychologically salient for the speakers. It is how the brain actually processes the language in real time. For an Arabic speaker, vocabulary is experienced less as a memorized list of discrete, isolated labels, and much more as a network of kinship.
Meaning you can literally feel the conceptual lineage of the words as they leave your mouth. You don't have to look up a dictionary to know that a desk, a book, and an author are related.
No, the language itself is constantly reminding you of their shared DNA.
That's wild.
And that means etymological resonance is unusually available in ordinary, everyday thought. When you speak, you sense the echoes across concepts. A single word can quietly carry all these overtones because you know it belongs to a root with a much wider orbit of meaning. Meaning gains depth through relation, rather than just definition.
I want to transition into how this actually looks on the physical page, because the visual representation of this root system completely changes the act of reading. The source material notes that Arabic uses a writing system called an abjad.
Yes, an abjad.
I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this correctly. An abjad essentially means the vowels are missing.
It is a writing system where, in ordinary everyday text, the short vowels are not explicitly written out. You primarily write the consonants.
Just the skeleton.
Right. There are long vowels that get written like a long A or long U sound, but the short connective structural vowel sounds are generally omitted.
But they do exist in some texts, right?
Yes, you see them in the Quran or in children's books to help them learn, or in poetry where exact pronunciation is vital. But if you pick up a newspaper in Cairo, or read a novel, or look at a text message on a phone, those short vowels are gone.
I want to try a mental exercise for our listener to really drive home the cognitive effect of this. Imagine picking up your morning newspaper in English, but the publisher decided to remove all the short vowels to save ink.
That would be a mess.
A total nightmare. You look at a headline and it just says THBYKCKD THBLL. The boy kicked the ball. Now, in English, our brains would stall out because our words are so random and disconnected. We rely completely on those vowels to tell us if BLL is ball, bell, bill, or bull.
Exactly.
But in Arabic, because of that mathematical root and pattern system we just talked about, this stripped-down script actually works perfectly. But it demands a completely different kind of cognitive engagement from the reader.
It demands total active participation. Because when you read an abjad, you are not just phonetically decoding letters one by one, sounding them out left to right like a child learning to read English.
Right.
You are recognizing a structured semantic shape. The consonants on the page give you the skeletal frame, they give you the root meaning, but you, the reader, have to actively supply the vocalic pattern from your own mind.
You have to build it as you go.
You have to pull from context, from your memory, and from your innate understanding of the grammar to breathe life into that skeleton and make the word whole.
So you can't just passively scan a page. You can't put your brain in neutral. You have to know what the sentence is trying to do, what its overall purpose is, in order to even pronounce the individual words correctly in your head.
You are constantly engaged in high-level pattern recognition. The language forces you to bring your own grammatical knowledge to the page to complete the thought. It is a collaborative act between the writer and the reader.
That's fascinating.
And visually, this script has taken on profound cultural and spiritual importance. Because in many classical Islamic artistic traditions, figurative representation, drawing realistic people or animals, was historically constrained to avoid idolatry.
So you couldn't paint murals of historical figures in a mosque the way you would see saints painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Exactly. And because of that constraint, all of that immense artistic, visual, creative energy had to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was channeled directly into the script itself.
The calligraphy.
Arabic calligraphy became one of the world's most extraordinary, sophisticated art forms. The written word wasn't just a utilitarian tool used to record trade logs or royal decrees. It became a visual devotion.
Wow.
It became a core design principle and a bearer of sacred beauty. The letters flow, they connect, they stretch, they compress. They literally change their physical shape depending on whether they sit at the beginning, the middle, or the end of a word.
It's an architecture of thought made visible. You recognize the sweeping frame of the root before you fill in the precise meaning. But this brings up a massive question for me. If individual words in Arabic are built on these deeply interconnected structural roots, what happens when you take these complex, heavy puzzle pieces and try to put them together into a completed picture? Like, how do these words behave when they start moving around in a sentence?
Which is the perfect pivot to syntax. How Arabic actually builds a thought. And once again, to really grasp it, we have to look at the stark contrast with English.
Right, our baseline.
English is a language that relies almost entirely on a rigid word order. We use subject, verb, object, SVO. The boy kicked the ball.
We need our sequence.
Yeah.
Who did the thing, what was the thing they did, and who or what did they do it to?
Yes.
It's very linear. It's procedural. If you mix that order up, kick the ball, the boy, or the ball, kick the boy, the meaning either collapses into total nonsense or the narrative completely reverses. We use the physical location of the word in the sentence to tell you its job.
Right. English is structurally quite rigid because it has lost most of its inflection over the centuries. Arabic, on the other hand, is a highly inflected language.
I want to make sure I'm completely translating these linguistic terms from the notes properly. Inflection basically means the word itself changes its outfit depending on its job in the sentence, right?
That's a fun way to put it, yeah.
It wears a specific subject hat or an object hat, regardless of where it stands in the room. Am I reading that right?
That is a fantastic way to visualize it. Inflection means the word modifies its form, often through very specific vowel endings called case endings, to explicitly signal its grammatical role.
Yep.
Classical Arabic and modern Standard Arabic preserve these rich case endings. Nouns have gender, either masculine or feminine. Verbs encode an incredible amount of information. An Arabic verb doesn't just tell you the action. Baked right into the verb itself is the person doing it, the number of people doing it, singular, dual, or plural, and the gender of the people doing it.
So the word carries a little structural name tag that says, I am the subject, I am masculine, and there are two of us.
Exactly.
And because that grammatical tag is baked right into the word, Arabic is freed from the rigid word order constraints we are chained to in English.
Precisely. Because the morphological name tags are doing all the heavy lifting of telling you who is doing what to whom, Arabic doesn't need to rely on strict sequence. It can arrange the pieces of the sentence with much more flexibility.
So you can move things around.
You can shift the order of the words to create emphasis, to alter the rhythm of a poem, or to achieve a specific rhetorical style. But historically, especially in classical Arabic and formal standard Arabic, the classic, most favored default word order is verb subject object, VSO.
Verb, subject, object. So instead of our English sequence, the poet wrote the verse, the formal Arabic sequence launches with the verb. Wrote the poet the verse.
Yes.
The action comes first.
It does.
Now, I want to push back on this just a little bit, or at least ask for a deeper nuance from the sources. Because when I read that in the notes, my immediate thought was, does this mean Arabic speakers literally think in verbs?
I see where you're going.
Are they psychologically wired to see the world as a series of actions rather than a world of objects? Because that sounds a bit deterministic, like the grammar is mechanically forcing a specific worldview.
That is a very important pushback. And what's fascinating here is that we must absolutely avoid strict linguistic determinism. You know, the outdated idea that grammar mechanically traps you into one way of seeing reality.
Right.
No, Arabic speakers do not inherently think in verbs at the expense of nouns. And in fact, the subject-verb-object order that we use in English is incredibly common in modern Arabic prose, in journalism, and especially in everyday spoken dialects.
Oh, okay. So it's not a hard rule today.
Not at all. However, the fact that the formal, historical, prestige layer of the language prefers launching with the verb is deeply psychologically and stylistically significant. It allows a sentence to open with a sense of pure movement before it establishes identity.
Movement before identity. Action before actor. That is such a cinematic way to construct a thought.
Think about the feeling of that in a piece of literature or a speech. You place the spotlight squarely on what is happening in the world, the dynamic shift in reality, before you narrow the lens down to who is responsible for it.
Wow.
English builds meaning by sequence, actor, action, result. Formal Arabic builds meaning by focus. You put the most dynamic, vibrant, important element at the very front of the stage.
But what about when there is no action? What if I am not talking about a poet writing a verse, but I just want to describe a static scene? Like, what if I just want to say, the house is beautiful?
In those instances, Arabic utilizes something called a nominal sentence. A verbal sentence, as we just discussed, starts with a verb. A nominal sentence begins with a noun or a pronoun. And the most striking feature of an Arabic nominal sentence is that in the present tense, it doesn't even need an explicit to be verb.
Wait, hold on. No to be verb. No is or are or am.
None. They simply aren't necessary for a present tense description. So instead of saying the house is beautiful, structurally, you are essentially saying the house beautiful.
Oh, wow. That completely removes the mechanical distance between the object and its description.
Yes, it does.
In English, the auxiliary verb almost acts like an equal sign in a math equation, you know. House equals beautiful. It's a mechanism linking two distinct concepts. By removing that equal sign, the description feels incredibly immediate. The beauty isn't something attributed to the house by a verb. It is just an inherent property sitting flush against the noun itself.
It creates a markedly different cadence of thought. If you look at sentence logic in English, it feels like a straight line you are tracing with your finger, point A to point B to point C. Sentence logic in Arabic feels much more like spatial arrangement. You're placing force, topic, and identity on a canvas exactly where they will resonate the most profoundly.
Okay, so let's take stock of what we have built so far in this deep dive. We have this stunning mathematical architecture, a root-based vocabulary that feels like an ancient, interconnected forest, an elegant, fluid script that demands the reader's active, collaborative participation, and a flexible, action-forward syntax that prioritizes movement and immediate description. It sounds incredibly elevated. It sounds like a language built for philosophers and poets.
It truly is.
But, and this is a massive but from our source material that completely shifted my understanding of this topic, nobody actually speaks this formal, elevated, poetic version of the language when they're sitting at their kitchen table, do they?
They do not. And this gap between the language of the page and the language of the kitchen is perhaps the most profound psychological and social reality of the Arabic language today.
Which brings us to the concept that completely blew my mind when I was reading through the stack, diglossia. We were talking about living in two worlds simultaneously. What exactly is diglossia, and how does it function in the Arab world?
Diglossia is a sociolinguistic framework. It describes a very specific situation where a single language community relies on two highly distinct varieties of the same language, but they use them in strictly separated social contexts.
Okay.
One is the high variety. the literary, formal, prestige version. The other is the low variety, the everyday, spoken, colloquial version. Arabic is considered by linguists to be the ultimate textbook global example of diglossia.
Now, I want to clarify the scale of this for you listening, because my first instinct was to compare this to English. I have different registers in English. I speak differently in a formal job interview than I do when I'm having good beer with my friends at a football game.
Sure.
I use bigger words. I don't use slang. I enunciate more clearly.
Yeah.
Is diglossia just a more extreme version of that?
No, the distance is exponentially greater than just tweaking your vocabulary or cleaning up your pronunciation. In the Arabic-speaking world, the high variety is modern Standard Arabic, which is deeply anchored in classical Arabic, the language of the Quran. This high variety is the language of formal writing, of literature, of the education system, of official news broadcasts, of political speeches, and of scriptural legitimacy. That is the language of the public official record.
Those are the heavy ceremonial robes we talked about in the introduction.
Yes, but the colloquial variety, the local dialect, is the language of actual, messy, lived everyday life. It is the language of the street, the home, the cafe, the marketplace.
The kitchen.
The kitchen, exactly. It is what you use to argue with a taxi driver, to tell a joke, to flirt, to sing lullabies to your children, to mourn a loss.
I was trying to find a metaphor to capture the weight of this for a native English speaker, and the best way I can describe it is to imagine that language has altitude.
Altitude, yeah.
English has registers, sure, but it's mostly just walking from the living room to the dining room. In Arabic, you are essentially required to switch entirely different operating systems depending on what altitude you're functioning at. To be socially functional, you have to be bilingual within your own native tongue.
That is the reality. Most Arabic speakers grow up navigating these two distinct linguistic worlds simultaneously. From a very young age, as soon as you enter the school system and encounter Standard Arabic, you learn that speech is not just one simple instrument you play the same way everywhere.
It's complex.
It is a massive, complex organ with different keyboards. And true social intelligence in the Arab world requires knowing precisely which register belongs to which room and which altitude is appropriate for the exact moment you are in.
Let's talk about the emotional and psychological impact of that split. Because on one hand, it feels like a heavy cognitive load to constantly translate between your street brain and your formal brain. But on the other hand, it seems like an incredibly rich emotional toolkit.
It creates a fascinating vertical axis of identity. Down at the bottom, closest to the ground, you have the local dialect. It is dense, it is specific, it is profoundly warm. Affection thrives in dialect.
Oh, interesting.
It is full of diminutives, specific local kinship terms, and the raw texture of the human voice. It is immediate and unfiltered. But then, as you move up that vertical axis towards Standard Arabic, the air gets thinner, but the view gets much, much wider.
Yeah.
The language becomes more polished, more historical, more pan-regional. It sheds the local slang and takes on the weight of centuries.
I want to paint a scenario to see how this plays out in real time. Let's say you are having a heated argument with someone in the street or at a cafe. Naturally, you are arguing in your local dialect, because it's an immediate, passionate, everyday interaction.
Right.
But say in the middle of this argument, you want to make a profound moral point, or you want to establish absolute, unshakable authority. Do you switch altitudes? Do you jump up to Standard Arabic?
You absolutely might. In the middle of a rapid-fire dialect argument, a speaker might suddenly drop a classical proverb, or a religious invocation, or a piece of ancient poetry in a much higher formal register. And doing so completely changes the atmosphere of the interaction. Choosing that formal register in that moment does much more than just make you sound well-educated. It invokes tradition. It commands absolute seriousness. It literally brings the weight of history and civilizational authority into the room with you.
So it's an anchor.
It is the linguistic equivalent of slamming a judge's gavel on the table.
Which explains something incredibly fascinating in the source notes: the mechanics of Arabic humor and insults. Because if you have these distinct altitudes of language, the comedy comes from deliberately playing with the gravity between them.
Oh, the humor thrives in the register mismatch. It is a playground for comedians and satirists.
Right. Because you have this high datified ceiling and this low gritty floor, you can generate comedy by suddenly dropping the floor out from under someone or inappropriately raising the ceiling.
Exactly. Because a speaker can shift between colloquial intimacy and elevated formality at will, they can treat something entirely trivial, like a minor argument over a parking space, with lofty, eloquent, Shakespearean seriousness.
That's amazing.
That overinflation of a mundane issue using the language of the Quran or classical poetry is hilarious. Or, conversely, you can drag a very solemn, pompous, overly formal setting abruptly down to earth with a devastating piece of gritty street wit.
It's linguistic whiplash. You're addressing a street brawl in a tuxedo or wearing muddy boots into a royal court.
And historically, Arabic literary culture made this kind of verbal dexterity a highly prized public art form. If we look all the way back to pre-Islamic poetry, there was a deep, culturally embedded tradition of eloquent praise and eloquent attack.
Oh, the poetry battles?
Yes. Poets were the media mouthpieces of their tribes. They could extol their tribal virtues in stunningly beautiful verse, but they could also pour absolute, highly structured linguistic scorn on their rivals. So when people talk about the tradition of poetic insults in Arabic, it is not a stereotype.
It's real.
It points to a deep surviving tradition where verbal skill itself, knowing exactly how to manipulate these registers, how to rhyme, how to use the roots, carries immense social status.
But this incredible layered system raises a massive logistical issue that the sources highlight. If the high register, Standard Arabic, is the common unifying language across the entire Arab world, but actual everyday life is lived exclusively in these local street dialects, what happens when the geography gets too wide?
That is the problem.
What happens when a person from Morocco, a person from Egypt, and a person from the Gulf states try to sit down at a cafe and just have a casual conversation? How do they even talk to each other?
That is the modern dilemma of the Arabic continuum. And to understand how this plays out, we really need to look at the map and we need to look at the clock.
Okay.
We need to trace the geographic spread and the historical weight of Arabic to see how it went from a localized desert tongue to a global phenomenon that fractured into countless pieces.
Let's trace that lineage. Where does this language actually begin its life?
Arabic belongs to the Semitic branch of the much broader Afro-Asiatic language family. Its deepest, most ancient roots lie in northwestern and northern Arabian speech communities.
So it is quite literally born in the desert.
It is born in the harsh, expansive environment of the Arabian Peninsula. And the script, as we touched on earlier, likely evolved from a North Semitic tradition. It probably came through the Nabatean alphabet, which was closely related to Aramaic.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this is a crucial piece of context that often gets lost. Arabic didn't just suddenly appear out of thin air as a fully formed, pristine, sacred artifact. It was shaped by the grit and reality of the physical world.
Right.
It was shaped by the rhythm of caravan routes crossing vast deserts, by ancient rock inscriptions left by travelers, by the complex oral poetry of nomadic tribes around campfires, and by constant, centuries-long contact with other cultures across the Near East. Trade, survival, and tribal mobility laid the essential groundwork.
It was a language of the earth and the caravan. But then an event occurs that completely permanently alters the trajectory of the language, elevating it to a status that very few languages in human history have ever achieved.
The decisive turning point. The 7th century, the revelation and composition of the Quran in an early form of classical Arabic.
And almost overnight, historically speaking, this language of desert traders and nomadic poets gains a religious centrality that anchors it for eternity.
It becomes the literal, untranslatable word of God for a rapidly expanding faith. As Islam expanded with unprecedented speed under the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, the Arabic language moved outward alongside it.
Like a wave.
Yes. And it quickly became much more than just a liturgical language used for worship. It became the language of administration, of law, of taxation, of an entire sprawling multi-ethnic empire.
And crucially, as the sources detail, it becomes the ultimate vessel for global knowledge. We are talking about the Islamic Golden Age. This is a vast geopolitical zone stretching from Iberia, modern-day Spain, and Portugal, swearing all the way across North Africa, through the Middle East, and deep into Central Asia.
During this golden age, Arabic was the great medium of both translation and original, groundbreaking scholarship. It absorbed the world's knowledge.
Everything.
Greek philosophy from Aristotle and Plato, Persian administrative systems, Indian mathematics and astronomy. It was all painstakingly translated into Arabic, debated in Arabic, and then expanded upon in Arabic. It was the absolute global standard language of medicine, of algebra, of astronomy, of optics.
Think about the weight of that. The language carries the unshakable prestige of scripture, plus the bureaucratic prestige of a massive empire, plus the intellectual prestige of global scientific scholarship. That is an incredibly heavy crown for one language to wear.
It is.
But let's fast forward from the Golden Age to the modern reality. Today, Arabic is spoken daily by more than 400 million people. It is one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. But this vast geographic explosion is exactly what fractured that everyday spoken dialect we were talking about earlier.
Completely. Because the empire expanded so far and absorbed so many different native populations, Arabic today is not a single uniform spoken thing. It is a massive dialect continuum.
But they are really distinct.
Very much so. You have major distinct dialect groupings that are heavily influenced by the languages that were spoken in those regions before Arabic arrived. You have the Maghrebi dialects in the west, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, which have Berber and French influences.
Okay.
You have Egyptian Arabic. You have Levantine Arabic in places like Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. You have Iraqi or Mesopotamian Arabic, and you have Gulf Arabic in the peninsula. And structurally, phonetically, these dialects can be wildly diverse.
The notes provide a stark example. A casual conversation in a deep Moroccan dialect can feel incredibly distant, almost entirely incomprehensible, to a native speaker listening in the Gulf. It's like a speaker of deep Scottish brogue trying to casually converse with someone speaking Jamaican patois.
That's a great comparison.
So if the dialects are that far apart, how does the modern Arab world hold together linguistically? What is the glue?
They are held together by a few different mechanisms. First, as we established, they are all still bound by that shared vertical relationship to modern standard Arabic and the literary religious horizon of the Quran. They share the same high ceiling.
Right.
But secondly, and much more recently, modern media has played a massive stabilizing role.
Egyptian cinema. This is one of my favorite details in the research.
It is a phenomenal example of cultural soft power. For decades in the 20th century, Cairo was the undisputed Hollywood of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Egyptian films, television soap operas, and music were broadcast into living rooms everywhere from Casablanca to Baghdad to Riyadh. Because of that immense, pervasive cultural footprint, the Egyptian dialect became a sort of unofficially recognized lingua franca for the Arab world.
So everyone just understood it.
Even if a Moroccan speaker and a Saudi speaker genuinely struggle to understand each other's local specific dialect, they can almost certainly both understand Egyptian Arabic and likely mimic it because they grew up watching the exact same movies and listening to the exact same singers.
So what does this all mean? You synthesize all of this together to understand what Arabic is today. You have this ancient script and religious weight colliding with colonial histories where French and English temporarily disrupted local educational systems.
Yes.
You have the post-colonial efforts to re-Arabize those nations. You have satellite TV and Al Jazeera leveling the playing field with a modernized standard Arabic. It's a wildly dynamic mix.
It is a constant daily negotiation of identity and history. And now you add the digital revolution and the internet to the mix, which brings its own chaotic linguistic evolution.
Right. The notes mentioned Arabici. What a brilliant adaptation.
Arabici is a perfect example of the language's resilience and adaptability. It is the practice of using Latin letters and Western numbers to type out colloquial Arabic phonetically, usually online, in chats, or in text messages.
So typing Arabic with an English keyboard.
Essentially, yes. This started because early internet infrastructure, keyboards, and SMS systems didn't always support the Arabic script, or they couldn't capture the highly specific, slangy sounds of local street dialects. So Arabic speakers innovated.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
They might use the number 3 to represent a specific, deep Arabic consonant, the ain, because the numeral 3 looks like the Arabic letter mirrored. They use the number 7 for a hard H sound.
It is ancient civilizational prestige colliding head-on with internet improvisation and character limits. It's amazing. But even with all this modern sprawl, all the loanwords from English and French, the internet slang, the leveling effect of satellite TV, the source material makes a very specific point.
Oh.
It argues that despite the globalization, the language remains deeply anchored by certain cultural concepts that simply refuse to be flattened out or easily translated.
Which brings us to the lexicon itself, the specific words that hold the DNA of the culture.
Yes, words with untranslatable depth. Because when a language has this much unbroken history, this much religious and poetic weight, it inevitably develops vocabulary that English just cannot capture without losing all of the magic and nuance.
Very true.
I want to go through some of the specific words highlighted in our sources, and I want us to really meditate on what they say about the worldview of the speaker. Let's start with this one. Tarab. T-A-R-A-B. If you look it up, the English dictionary might flatly translate this as musical ecstasy.
which is a remarkably thin, almost clinical
That
translation.
sounds so boring.
It does. Tarab isn't just about really enjoying a song or tapping your foot to a good beat. It refers to a profound, almost overwhelming state of emotional transport. It is the feeling of being completely enveloped, elevated, and altered by the music.
Wow.
And crucially, it is not a solitary experience. Tarab relies on the interaction between the performer and the receptive, engaged presence of the audience. It is an active state of shared enchantment.
It is music as a physical, emotional environment, not just background noise.
Okay, here's another one that carries huge ethical weight. Saber. S-A-B-R. Usually translated simply as patience. But patience in English is a pretty mundane concept.
Right, it's very passive.
It just means waiting in line at the DMV without yelling at the clerk or waiting for a pot of water to boil. It is mostly passive.
In English, patience is the absence of complaint. Saber, however, is not the absence of anything. It is the presence of something incredibly strong. It carries a massive spiritual and ethical weight in the Arabic tradition.
What does it imply?
It suggests deep endurance. It implies an active moral steadiness. It is spiritually meaningful perseverance in the face of profound hardship, grief, or delay. It is not just waiting. It is an active, dignified resilience that honors God and honors the self.
Beautiful. Next one. Baraka, usually translated as blessing.
Again, we run into the limitations of English. Blessing in English can feel very transactional, fleeting, or formulaic. Someone sneezes, you say bless you, and it's over. Or you count your blessings at Thanksgiving.
But baraka implies a kind of living, transmissible, almost physical grace. It is a divine abundance that can reside permanently in a specific person, in a holy place, or in a righteous action.
Oh, wow.
It is an active spiritual energy that flows through the physical world, bringing growth, protection, and prosperity. It is something you can tangibly seek out and feel the presence of.
And the last one from our specific list in the notes, adab.
Adab is fascinating because it seamlessly blends concepts that English and Western thought usually insist on keeping strictly separate.
How so?
Well, depending on the exact context, adab can translate to literature, it can mean refined etiquette, it can mean cultural cultivation, and it can mean proper, ethical, moral conduct. Because in the classical Arabic worldview, these things are not distinct disciplines.
Oh, they're all tied together.
Exactly. Being well-read, being articulate, and being a good, polite, highly moral person are all fundamentally intertwined. Bad manners are a failure of cultivation. Bad literature is a failure of morality. Adab is the total package of a refined human being.
That is profound. And what I love about exploring these notes is seeing how this cultural depth doesn't just live in poetry or theology textbooks. It bleeds straight into the physical, everyday, sensory world.
It's everywhere.
Let's look at the cultural feedback loop the sources mention, starting with food. The notes specifically brought up the Arabic food vocabulary, particularly around coffee.
Yes. Across Arab societies, from the Levant to the Gulf, coffee is never just a caffeinated beverage. It is a highly coded, deeply embedded act of hospitality, generosity, and ceremonial welcome. The notes point out that UNESCO actually explicitly recognizes Arabic coffee traditions as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity.
So the language reflects that gravity. The vocabulary of food is entirely wrapped up in the ethics of hosting.
Exactly. The terms for preparing, serving, and accepting food sit inside a much broader, morally weighted vocabulary of sharing, gathering, and honoring guests. The dining table isn't just a utilitarian surface to consume nutritional calories. The table is a moral space.
A moral space.
And the language mirrors that reality by giving the act of feeding someone an atmosphere of deep honor and obligation.
And this cultural feedback loop applies heavily to sound as well. We talked about tarab, that state of musical ecstasy. But looking at the linguistic breakdown, it seems like the language itself is structurally engineered for music.
It absolutely is. Arabic phonetics, the actual physical sounds the mouth makes to produce the language, lend themselves beautifully to vocal ornament, to dramatic elongation, and to complex melodic contour.
The actual mechanics of speaking it?
Yes, you have these deep, guttural, emphatic consonants that provide a strong rhythmic backbone. You have textured fricatives. And crucially, you have these distinct long vowels that can be stretched out, bent, and suspended almost indefinitely by a skilled singer.
So when you pair that phonetic architecture with the Arabic musical tradition of maqam, which for our listener is this incredibly intricate system of microtonal melodic pathways, rather than just the simple major and minor chords we use in Western music, it creates something transcendent.
It's unparalleled.
The source notes make a beautiful observation. Arabic singing often sounds like the language itself is being melted down and turned into pure emotion. The heavy consonants give the emotion physical texture, and the long vowels give it an emotional suspension that just hangs in the air.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, the untranslatable words, the etiquette of the coffee ritual, the melodic elongation, what we are really talking about is a culture and a language that values the delivery of the message just as much, if not more, than the raw data of the message itself.
It's how you say it, not just what you say.
And this represents a massive fundamental divergence from English. Modern American English, in particular, heavily prizes clarity through naked directness. Get straight to the point, give it to me straight, don't beat around the bush.
We tend to think that politeness, rhetorical flair, or emotional framing is just unnecessary decoration. In a business meeting or a news report, we feel like those things are actually getting in the way of the data.
Yes, English wants the data stripped of its packaging, but Arabic, depending heavily on the social context, prizes clarity through appropriateness.
Appropriateness.
Did you use the right introductory formula? Did you use the correct greeting for the time of day and the status of the person? Did you calibrate the exact right degree of warmth or respectful distance or formal dignity? In the Arabic linguistic habitat, the politeness isn't decoration wrapped around the message. The politeness is a core component of the message.
To really understand how unique and specific this is, I want to do a sort of comparative linguistic showdown. Let's look at Arabic by placing it right next to its closest linguistic sibling and then placing it right next to the language you and I are speaking to each other right now.
That sounds like a great exercise.
Let's start with the sibling relationship, Arabic and Hebrew.
Arabic and Hebrew are absolutely siblings. They grew up in different historical houses, but they share a deep, undeniable Semitic inheritance. Structurally, they are built from the same DNA.
From the very roots.
Literally. They both utilize that root and pattern morphology we discussed at the beginning, the consonantal skeleton filled in with vowel patterns. They both use right-to-left consonantal scripts, the abjads. They both carry an immense, historically unparalleled weight of sacred textual prestige.
So structurally, on a base level, they share that feeling that words are networked families rather than isolated bricks. But where do they diverge? Because emotionally, historically, and politically, they feel like very different entities today.
The most profound divergence is in their historical continuity and how they relate to the spoken vernacular. Arabic represents a massive, unbroken, continuous civilizational scale.
It never stopped.
From the pre-Islamic poets to the modern streets of Cairo, Arabic never once stopped being a spoken, living vernacular. It maintained that high prestige register of the Quran while simultaneously sprawling out and fracturing into countless street dialects. It is a story of continuous, uninterrupted expansion and deep diglossia.
It is a river that never stopped flowing, even as it branched off into 100 different streams.
And Hebrew. Hebrew represents a linguistic trajectory that is almost entirely unique in human history. Hebrew was the vibrant spoken language of ancient Israel, but it gradually ceased to be the ordinary spoken vernacular for daily life thousands of years ago.
It went silent on the streets.
It was largely replaced in the street by Aramaic and later by other languages in the diaspora. Hebrew was preserved beautifully, meticulously, and passionately as a liturgical and literary language, the language of prayer, of Torah study, of high poetry.
But not for buying bread.
Right. It wasn't the language a mother used to scold her child or a merchant used to negotiate. Then, in the late 19th and 20th centuries, it was deliberately, miraculously revived from text to tongue. It was consolidated into a modern, single continuum, the everyday spoken language of the modern state of Israel.
So Arabic is a lineage that never stopped speaking, just fracturing into many different voices across an empire. And Hebrew is a lineage that kept its memory perfectly preserved in writing and prayer, and then had to consciously teach itself to breathe aloud again in the modern world.
That is a beautiful way to phrase it. And because of those radically different historical journeys, their mental textures feel different today. Arabic feels broad, vast, layered, and regional. It is defined by that vertical axis of high standard and low dialect we talked about.
Right.
Modern Hebrew feels much more consolidated and unified. The revivalists took all those ancient textual strata and compressed them into a single, modern, national spoken form. In modern Hebrew, you generally use the same language continuum to read a biblical text that you use to argue with a bus driver in Tel Aviv. There isn't that massive diglossic canyon.
And the notes point out that even visually, if you just look at the scripts side by side, you can see the difference in their historical personalities. Arabic calligraphy is this flowing, continuous, cursive, connected river of ink. The letters physically reach out and bind to one another. Hebrew script, the square script, is made of chiseled, discrete, block-like letters that stand individually on the line.
Yes. Visually, Arabic feels like thought moving in continuous, interconnected lines. Hebrew feels more segmented, monumental, and discrete on the page.
Now, let's pivot to English. We've touched on it throughout our conversation, but let's draw the final stark contrast, Arabic versus English.
If Arabic and Hebrew are closely related siblings, Arabic and English are distant strangers operating from entirely different cognitive paradigms.
Not even in the same neighborhood.
Exactly. Thinking in English, as we noted with the SVO word order, is highly linear. It is heavily segmentable. It is front-loaded with explicitness. It leaves very little to context if it can avoid it.
It feels like English is an engineer. It is highly procedural. It is modular. It wants to build a very sturdy, predictable, functional bridge from point A to point B as efficiently as possible with no wasted materials.
Precisely. It values efficiency. Now, Arabic can absolutely do that. It was, after all, the premier language of advanced mathematics, engineering, and empirical science for centuries. But its deeper inherited cultural instinct leans heavily toward relation, emotional resonance, and rhetorical texture. Look at how the two languages handle the concept of storytelling.
Right. The notes specifically pointed out that modern English storytelling is absolutely obsessed with plot efficiency. What happens next? Drive the narrative forward. Cut the fluff. Show, don't tell. Get to the climax.
But traditional Arabic storytelling, which is deeply rooted in the oral traditions of pre-Islamic poetry and the mesmerizing cadences of the Quran, operates on a different metric of success.
How so?
It has historically given much greater honor to verbal beauty, to the musicality of the phrasing, to the art of the eloquent digression, and to establishing a profound moral atmosphere. In the Arabic tradition, the style of the delivery builds authority right alongside the actual content of the story. How you say it proves you are worthy of being listened to.
For you listening, I want you to really reflect on what that means for your brain and your daily life. Speaking English trains you to get straight to the point. It rewards brutal efficiency and naked data. But speaking Arabic trains you to constantly situate your thoughts socially and historically.
It's a completely different filter.
Before you speak, the language asks you, who exactly are you speaking to? What is the history of the root word you're about to use? What is the appropriate moral and emotional tone for this exact moment? It trains you to be hyper-aware, relationally and rhetorically. It is, without exaggeration, a profound shift in human consciousness, depending on which language you are operating in.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have covered an immense amount of ground, wandering through the many rooms of this linguistic house. We started at the very foundation, looking at the architecture of thought, those three-letter consonantal roots that build interconnected forests of meaning, and the abjad script that demands a reader's active participation.
We covered a lot.
We looked at the dynamic, action-first logic of the syntax that puts movement before identity. We explored the complex, sometimes dizzying social tightrope of diglossia, constantly balancing the heavy ceremonial robes of formal standard Arabic with the warm, intimate, witty dialects of the street and the kitchen. We traced a historical trajectory that spans from the ancient poetry of desert caravans to the paradigm-shifting revelation of the Quran, through the translation movements of the global scientific golden age, all the way to modern satellite television and internet era busy.
It's quite the timeline.
We examined the profound philosophical depth of untranslatable words like tarab and sabr. And finally, we saw how Arabic's massive, unbroken civilizational continuum contrasts with the miraculous revived continuity of Hebrew and the procedural linear efficiency of English.
If you had to distill all of this research, all of these notes, down to one final resonant takeaway for our listener, what is the deepest truth about the Arabic language?
The deepest truth is that to think and speak in Arabic is to consciously participate in an ongoing, living tradition. It is a language that definitively proves that structure, aesthetic beauty, and civilizational memory are not separate, isolated things.
They're all one.
They are deeply, inherently intertwined in the very syllables you speak. Arabic proves something miraculous, that a language can be incredibly ancient, carrying the heavy weight of fallen empires and eternal scripture, and yet remain explosively, dynamically messy, and wonderfully alive at the exact same time. It is not just a language that is spoken, it is a language that is inherited.
Inherited. And that leads me to a final lingering thought I want to leave you with, inspired by everything we've unpacked in this deep dive. If learning about Arabic shows us so clearly that language is not just a sterile, neutral tool for communication, but rather a powerful form of inherited civilizational memory, it really makes you wonder about the mundane words you use every single day.
It does.
What forgotten memories, what ancient social codes, what hidden relationships are hiding right now in the root structure of your own native language, just waiting for you to notice them.
It really makes you look at the walls of your own linguistic house very differently.
It truly does. Until next time, keep exploring the rooms of that house. We'll see you on the next deep dive.